Hey everybody, so for this week we're going to look at comparing prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. So I've got a brief little slideshow that we'll go through to kind of differentiate between these two types. So first we're going to start with watching this lovely video prepared from someone else on YouTube. So to do this I've got to turn off my microphone, but I'll tune back in shortly.
Prokaryotic cells, which is what we will focus on. First, just a refresher, recall that the modern cell theory includes a statement that all living things are made of one or more cells. All living things. In the three domains of life, prokaryotes are organisms that can be bacteria or archaea. They are unicellular, which means they are single-celled organisms. Eukaryotes are organisms that fit all in this last domain, eukarya. Eukaryotes can be protists, plants, animals, or fungi. They can be unicellular or they can be multicellular, which means they can be made up of many cells, like you. By the way, just to clarify, the word prokaryote is typically used to refer to the organism itself. When you are describing its cell, you are describing a prokaryotic cell. Same for eukaryote. Eukaryote typically refers to the organism itself, and when you are describing its cells, those are eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells do have a lot in common. Both have DNA. That's critical because DNA is the cell's genetic material. Both prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells have ribosomes, which are small organelles, an organelle being like a tiny organ. The ribosomes have the important job of making proteins. Gotta make protein. Both cells have cytoplasm, the jelly fluid within cells. Both of them have a cell membrane, also known as a plasma membrane, which is critical because it controls what goes in and out of the cell, and therefore maintaining homeostasis. All cells have a cell membrane. Now, as for cell walls, most prokaryotic cells have cell walls. Many eukaryotic cells, plant cells and fungal cells, for example, can have cell walls, but there are plenty of eukaryotic cells that don't have cell walls, such as animal cells. What makes prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells different is especially interesting. Eukaryotic cells are more complex than prokaryotic cells. They tend to be larger than most prokaryotic cells. And to help me remember some more differences in this next part, I like to remember that pro in prokaryote rhymes with no, and eu in eukaryote rhymes with do. Prokaryotic cells have no nucleus to contain their DNA, so you will find their DNA is not contained within a nucleus. It's a bit messy here. They have no membrane-bound organelles. Membrane-bound organelles are fancy organelles that have their own membrane, like the nucleus, mitochondria, the endoplasmic reticulum, and the Golgi apparatus. A big indicator of eukaryotic cells is this nucleus. Eukaryotic cells do have a nucleus to contain their DNA. Depending on what type of eukaryotic cell it is, it could have different types of membrane-bound organelles. For example, a plant cell is likely to have chloroplasts, while an animal cell would not.
Alright, so after watching that brief video, it kind of talked about the two cells and some of the basic similarities and differences, so I'm going to just recap those things here. So feel free to pause the video, you can screenshot, save these things, write these things down later to kind of remind yourself, and also use this information whenever you are working on completing your actual graded assignment for this week. So between these two things, prokaryotic, they are going to be single-celled unicellular organisms, and so this would be bacteria or archaea. And then eukaryotic, an easy way to remember, and I'm sure your previous teachers have said it this way, but for you, it sounds like the word you. That is what we are. We are eukaryotic. And so this can be a single-celled or multi-celled organism. And examples could be protists, plants, animals, and fungi. So the similarities between these two. Both of these cells, they have DNA. They both have ribosomes, and so these are small organelles that create proteins. The cell needs proteins to be able to function. And then it also has cytoplasm. This is that jelly-like fluid that fills up all the empty space in the cell. So think of it like the styrofoam packing peanuts, that it fills up that space so that the organelles can stay in the cell and they don't injure themselves, or they don't run into other things. It kind of keeps them in place. more similarities would be the cell membrane. They both have this. The membrane controls what goes in and out of the cell. That is the semi-permeable thing that surrounds it. And so it keeps very large things out and tiny things in. And they both have, most of them have a cell wall. The exception of that is animal cells. Those do not have a cell wall at all. So looking at the differences, prokaryotic are simple because they are unicellular. It's just one little cell. Eukaryotic are more complex because they have multiple organelles inside of those cells working together to do a function. Prokaryotic are usually small. Eukaryotic are larger because they have to fit the more complex things inside of it. For prokaryotic, remember that pro rhymes with no because it has no nucleus. There's no nucleus at all. The DNA just kind of floats around, stays within that cytoplasm there. And then for eukaryotic, the U rhymes with do because it has a nucleus. The DNA is found there. And then prokaryotic, they do not have any membrane-bound organelles, whereas eukaryotic does. And so that membrane-bound means that the organelles are surrounded by like an outer layer. They're protected while they're inside of that cell. So before we move further into the week, let's recap really quickly on plant and animal cells, kind of comparing and contrasting both of these. So I have a Venn diagram here labeled with plant, animal cell, and both. So for plant cells, these type of cells, so both of these cells we're talking about, plant cell and animal cell, these are both eukaryotic cells. But plant cells, they have a cell wall. They have a rigid shape, meaning that it doesn't change. They have chloroplast, which is the site of photosynthesis. That's what gives it its green color because it also holds chlorophyll there. And plant cells often have one large vacuole. Animal cells, they have a non-rigid shape because their shape can change different sizes and features depending on what type of specific cell it is. And then they also have multiple smaller vacuoles because they don't need to hold on to as much water as a plant cell does. And so it does not have one large vacuole. Both of these types of cells, though, they both have a cell membrane. Remember, that's what controls what goes in and what goes out. They both have a nucleus, which stores the DNA. They both have cytoplasm. That's the jelly-like structure or jelly-like stuff that fills up all the empty space. They both have a mitochondria, and so this is where we have cellular respiration or happening there. It's where it's producing the energy for that cell, and they both have vacuoles.